with host Karen Nunez Tesheira and Dennise Demming with a very special guest to come on in a short. The topic, Constitution Reform, may I say part 2. Good
Yes,
afternoon, Karen.
and its relevance to you, the listener, to all of us. That's very important. Good afternoon to Dennise, and now Dennise just broke a little smile there. Good afternoon to David, and I was just speaking to our guest. Timothy's coming on. He said he worked it all
Yes.
out. Timothy, you worked it all out.
Yes, I think so. Last time I had a separate monitor. So what was happening is the voice was on a different monitor from where I was. So
But you're not looking very academic, with that background. You're making me
you
very
want to,
jealous.
no, you want an
I
academic
hope you're
background?
not there. I hope you're not. I hope you're not.
Don't change anything now. No, it
No,
would.
don't change it. Don't
Let's
change
work
it. Don't
with
change
it.
it. Oh my God. You
Next
want
time
to
you're going to change something, and the whole thing just
let
This
us
is the
be-
calm
let us
after
be
the
jealous
storm.
now.
I don't understand.
come after the storm. But just before we begin, I want to invite our listeners to please reach out to us.
Yeah.
222-TALK, that's 222-8255. And if you're calling from abroad, there's a toll-free number, 866-525-1099. That's 866-525-1099.
David, did you have something scrolling along with the numbers the other day?
Oh, that will happen, Karen. That will happen. David will do that.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
David will put up the numbers.
Yes. No, but no. We never had it before. And then one day I saw it. I said, what? Making progress.
Yeah. David will put it up. He'll put up the numbers. But Karen, just before we begin the conversation about the Constitution, there's something that's on my mind that happened that I've seen in the newspapers. And that is this whole thing about the PAHO report that the Minister of Health seems not to want to accept. Have you seen that report?
No, I haven't seen the report.
I've
So
read about it, but I don't know how he doesn't accept it. I mean, he commissioned it.
Are you sure? He doesn't. I thought he accepted it.
Well, he put it in Parliament. So he launched it, he put it in Parliament. But there's a newspaper report that in which he's saying that the report, there are two people who were not interviewed to do the report. Therefore, he's challenging the report. And I'm just wondering about that, because if you invite PAHO to do an investigation and a report for you, I mean, PAHO is an international organization. They're a neutral organization. So what is the problem? Why don't you just accept the report and we move on?
What do you say? Now about Timothy, what he had to say. Timothy, or take off his jacket, okay.
Yeah.
What is your view on Timothy?
Well, I don't know about moving on. Surely the more important thing is he act upon it. Apparently, sanitization and the training and I think having a much more regular turnover of staff is important, because in a NICU, it's a very intensive sort of arrangement. So you can't have people at the same sort of hourly rates, meaning the length of time they spend there has to be shortened in order that they will always be at their peak. There's no opportunity for slippage in a NICU. You slip, you slide, and that's it.
What I will say, since you did ask me, it's the neonatal intensive care unit. So anytime you're put in an intensive care unit, it means you are in a very serious situation where, you will probably, it can be fatal once you're in an ICU. With neonatal, it's even more so, because most of those babies are born on, it's not so much their weight as my understanding is. Weight, of course, has a part to do with it, of course. But because they are born before gestational period, many of them, their lungs are not fully developed. And because of that, they cannot breathe on their own. And that is one of the major issues. And when I was on another program, I did look up, and the newspapers did put what was the general average of deaths in the neonatal ward. Because once you're in an ICU, That's what you're looking at. When you look at a neonatal, which by the way was set up by Dr. Manning, she set it up. And we are in the above average. The European countries are 3 per 1,000, and in the Caribbean it's something like 6. I think we fall at 8 per 1,000. Now I may be biased, so let me just say that up front, because when my daughter first qualified, no one wanted to work in NICU because it was very long hours. I mean, she literally would leave home with pillows and blanket because she slept over, and she had the most extraordinary. I have never met him. Extraordinary respect for Dr. Timothy and the work and the hard work that they did. So that is my perspective of the NICU, which of course is very biased, but from my understanding, we have not gone beyond the norm in terms of the average of things, where we don't want that, of course. And I think that maybe he has his reasons why he's not happy with it. Let's wait and see why he's not happy with it. Because people did say at the very get-go that they spent 2 days and you can make a report in 2 days. So, I'm not going to form an opinion one way or the other. I need more information. That's my position right now.
Yes, and my position, I think you have a very respectful position, Karen. My position is that you need to accept, since you commissioned the report, yes, and you asked PAHO for the report, this is not like people who could be bribed to do a report for you. They do neutral reports. They do things.
People are bribed in this country.
People are bribed in this country. You don't want to say that. I could say that. I wouldn't say who because I don't want to get sued.
Don't call anybody. People is too broad too. You'll have to sue the whole country and not so Timothy.
But people are, if not bribed, yes, they're bribed. Let me not try to be diplomatic about it. They are bribed for some of the things they do. And this is what is he suggesting about PAHO? That you have a professor emeritus, you have 2 doctors. What are you suggesting? That they cannot do a proper report? As far as I'm concerned, you take the report, whatever the recommendations are, and you try to implement them. If you don't agree with some of them, just hush. But try to.
I think I can't take that harsh position. As we're talking about emeritus, we have emeritus with us. We have the head emeritus of the law firm of Hammersmith and Company, who is our guest, who's going to be talking to us about constitutional reform, and has sat on this and has been a former senator. In our Senate, the former president of the Senate in Trinidad and Tobago, and has sat on many, many boards and been involved in the working with whoever the other parties would be on huge projects involving our energy sector and all major sectors. So if there's anybody who can have an opinion, but you see the reason I hold back, and then let's get pivot, which was it.
Continue, and you just froze for a little while.
Stand by, folks. We have a little internet fluctuation here.
Technology in this country is a problem. We have a minister of digitalization, and our guest, he's been right. It is that sometimes you don't know everything, and I want to withhold a final position on that until I've heard more.
Okay, Karen. So we go into the Constitution. So we're heading to the Constitution. But you know what just happened? All of us froze.
Yeah, they all
froze. All right.
Yes, we were spinning around, Mr. Hammersmith. We're all spinning around.
And you know what I find amazing, absolutely amazing, is that I've done this show with Karen from St. Lucia as well as from Canada.
Yes.
And on those 2 occasions, I never had digital problems. On those 2 occasions, I was here for the whole thing. So what is happening with our digitization?
That's another topic.
It is another topic, but it's affecting us all the time. So we'll have that one day. So let me start off with the Constitution conversation.
Yeah. And I wanted just before you speak on Dennise, I had spoken to her just a few minutes before the show started, and I said to Tim that I want to invite him, as he's our guest, and he has made contributions on Constitution Forum to really start to talk about the one or two things he particularly feels that needs to be addressed, but in such a way that the man in the street could see how it makes a sense. So if you don't mind me hijacking you a little bit, it was
No, Karen, I got accustomed to you hijacking me.
What goes on the show? Hijacking, freezing.
Hijacking, freezing, driving. It's a lovely So, Tim,
Who just now?
you had with Karen before. Could you please proceed?
Yes, Tim. You're on.
All right. Good evening.
Yes, you've been on for a while. Eh?
Is that so? All right.
Yeah.
So where do we start here?
Where do you want to start?
Where you want to start, as I told you.
Well, we're focusing on the Constitution. I
Right,
think, one of the things that people, when they talk about the Constitution, immediately they draw references to the United States Constitution and should we have a president? That is one of the issues that comes to the mind of people. So I don't know if perhaps that's where we would like to start this evening. What should we have a presidential system, or should we have the system as we have it right now with a prime minister? Or should be there's some in-between position? Because what we need is a constitution that is tailor-made to Trinidad and Tobago. It's not one that's borrowed necessarily from elsewhere. It's not that you discount what a foreign entity may have. You look at that, but you want to tailor-make it. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but you nevertheless want to adjust it for our society in order that it's a living document, and in order that it relates to the people can relate to it. That becomes important because this is how they're governed.
So what would be the advantage of saying you're going with a executive presidency, which would mean that they no longer need the figurehead, mostly, that's what it really is, of a president? And how do you see the advantage of it, especially in the way that United States elects their executive president, separate and apart from their Congress and their Senate?
Sure. You do have some advantages of having a president with, and therefore the executive, who is represented by the president, having a much more clear-cut differentiation between the legislature and the executive. And that's one of the philosophies one tries to get at when you create a constitution, when you create a governance instrument. I'm not sure that I would follow I think the American model would create more problems for us rather than less, quite frankly. Because, in the United States, they do have times when you have just logjam. Nothing gets done because neither side want to support what the president is putting forward. I think, frankly, in Trinidad, you might well create that sort of frozen atmosphere between the executive and the legislature. And my preference is, yes, I think we need a president who is independent. I think that's more important to me, who is independent of the executive. And unfortunately, on paper, the president is independent of the executive. But the reality is that people believe that the president is simply the appointee made by the prime minister and therefore subject to the prime minister. And more, there's more to it than that. Because we moved from a governor general who replaced the queen, it was basically a ceremonial type arrangement, so that you in the Republican Constitution, we upgraded that somewhat, but not nearly as much as I think we need to do. Because it's ceremonial, 90% ceremonial, I don't feel that the general public think that they're getting value for money by having a president in the manner in which we have the president. Because the president, I think, should have a substantive job. So not in control of the executive, but nonetheless a much more substantive role. This executive has the same important roles in terms of appointing people to various commissions, appointing the independent senators. And for that reason, you want to find that this president is independent and of the executive. And therefore, I would favor the president being elected by the people and not
how would that be done?
party.
What way?
But I don't want to adopt the American system.
Okay, so if we're looking at keeping the president, but in giving the president real independence, not in fact, she does not have, or he does not have it, because Section 80 clearly says, Section 80 of the Constitution clearly says that the president shall act on the advice of the cabinet or a minister. Shall act. She has no choice. So when she does something, the advice, when they talk about doing things after consultation with the prime minister and leader of opposition, even the, I think, Hayatali committee asked, what's the difference between consult and advice? Because at the end of the day, he was elected by the government. Why? Because, which is what I would like you to address. I mean, the fact of the matter, this farce of an electoral college. If the electoral college, if you won the election, it means that you have the majority in the parliament. And whilst all the members of the House, including Senate, are required to, or if they don't come, but they're all required to be there to vote. But you already have the simple majority, both in the Senate and in the lower house. And having that majority already means that you choose the person. And what makes it even more egregious, in my view, is that there's not even any pretense. Section 24 says that if the president is elected or appointed as president, he shall immediately vacate his office in the Senate or the House of Representatives. So you are clearly giving, under the Constitution, the right to take the person straight out of the parliament, straight out of cussing the opposition, right? Straight out of telling them on the other side what they think of them and already big teeth and big thing. And because some of them are very good speakers, I know that as a fact. Taking them straight off and making them president, because Section 24 says they can do that. And Section 80 says that she has to. And Section 81 says that if you cannot inquire as to whether or not the president did or did not consult with the opposition or the prime minister. So let us stop the pretense. Even the Judicial and Legal Service Commission, the chairman of the commission is the Chief Justice, who's appointed by the president. So even though the president does act on the other appointments that the Chief Justice will be done in consultation with the president. Let's be real. How they brought in through the Electoral College, that is a farce. Section 24, you could come straight off your seat last week, Friday, cussing those people on the other side and saying all they want. And then next minute, you turn in to be the president of the country and be independent of thought.
Karen, here's something. You've just talked about Section 21, Section 24, Section 8. Can you ask Tim one question? Because remember, we're talking to the man in the maxi.
The reason why I do that,
Dennise,
the reason why I do that, Dennise, and then Tim, and over to Tim, is because people too often like to make broad brush statements. And when you make broad brush statements, I want to make sure that when I said what I said, you run and you pick up your computer and say, hey, what you say there is right. You know?
Karen, 90% of the audience not doing that. So let us talk about it in a way that
you will go you do it your way, and I'll continue my way. I'm a lecturer, and that's how I do it.
Answer it.
What I can say is Karen is correct. I mean, the president, I think, does have her own discretion to make certain appointments, but that's relatively small. The important ones, like she can make that decision on the independent senators. I think that's a very important decision, except that you begin with the people not believing the president is independent of the executive, and therefore she will choose independent senators, or he will choose independent senators. I don't mean to be pointing fingers.
No, not at all.
Or people who, will support the government of the day. And therefore, you've defeated the purpose of having independent senators. What I do agree is that the people should vote for the position of president from candidates who are not aligned to any political party, let's say, over the last 5 years at least. But more than that, I want the president, as I mentioned, to have a substantive job. I see the president as being chair of a fiscal council. And we can go into more what I would like the fiscal council to do. But fiscal councils in every successful country, certainly in the Commonwealth and beyond that, there is a fiscal council, because it is one of the checks and balances that you bring into the system in order to ensure that the executive just can't erode all rights and really serves like a king. What I say goes.
Yeah.
And hence the check and balance you need. And if you have a candidate who has to chair a fiscal council, then the types of qualities that president must have, qualifications, must include, they must know about finance and management and budgets and the economy. They must be steeped in that. So they must demonstrate that they've had, let's say, 10 years, practice or even in the academic field in that area relating to these things. So imagine if we had candidates not aligned to parties who the people can vote for, who are not getting any hustings, they're not getting any badinage of, bad talking one or the other. They only allowed to put forward their qualifications and maybe a paragraph or two about themselves. And it is on that basis the people vote for a particular president.
So Tim,
people.
Can I just ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How will this look? How will we roll out? Let's say we have an agreement. What has to happen for us to change the method in which the president is selected? How are we going to get to the voting?
Sure, we would have to amend the Constitution. Right now, the Constitution says that the president is elected by an electoral college. We all know that's a fudge. It's elected by whoever the prime minister decides is the best person. And Trinidad, unfortunately, when you look at a constitution, there may be some things in there which look like as if they're cosmetic, really. Because what happens is, look at the power of a prime minister. He's a political leader of a party. Whether whatever they might say in their regulations, the truth is he or she has a veto power on the candidates who can go up in any constituency. So, don't they, their affinity becomes to the political leader, not to the country, not to the constituency, but rather the leader. So he chooses that. You get a party winning the government because and the prime minister appointed by the president as a person who leads the majority of persons in the lower house. The prime minister then chooses his 15 persons who will serve, or 15 or 20 or whatever it is, as the head of each ministry. And then he chooses the 16 persons who serve as senators on behalf of the government, and one of them go up to become the president of the Senate. I mean, that is putting power in one person that is just beyond what would have been anticipated when we said, Dr. Williams said, the English constitution is good enough for us. Well, they didn't have a written constitution. But besides that, they had, nonetheless, besides the written word, there were always understandings, conventions by which people acted. And I don't know if you listened to Professor, is it Dr. Terry Farrell? He spoke recently at the Transparency International grouping. And what he says that where we fail is there's a lack of trust. And of course, if you set up a system like that, nobody trusts the system.
It's true.
And if we're going to review the Constitution and make amendments, we have to reinforce those points where the people could trust the independent senators. They could trust the government to do what is right, because we have a fiscal council, which acts as a check and balance.
And you have the right and a president that is independent. And I think what they'll have to also do, of course, is they will have to abolish that section that allows someone to come straight out the Senate or straight out the lower house and a politician and become a candidate for presidency.
No, well, they would abolish one term. I'm saying there's an election by the public of the president. That's what I'm promoting. And therefore, he has nothing to do with it. The party has nothing to it. In fact, the party has to stand aside.
Well,
because if they put forward a candidate, the candidate could get disbarred from being a candidate for the presidency.
See, Timothy, when you spoke about the issue of trust, I remember looking up the Heritage and Civilization Fund and equivalent, and I think Norway, and the high taxes they pay there, and the people do not complain. And they said the reason why they are high up on the Human Development Index. And they said one of the main reasons is because the people trust the government. The problem in Trinidad does not start with electing that the leader of the party becomes the prime minister. Because once you are in party politics and whoever is the leader of the party, you're going to toe the line. And those who don't want to toe the line, we saw it acted out recently. That whole thing about what goes on in the party leadership and how it is manipulated only encourages a further lack of independence, not only in terms of who is going to select, who is going to be the chairman, because whoever is the leader is going to be the prime minister. Whoever is the leader is going to be the prime minister. And if that further reinforces the fact that the selection of the prime minister, that was the point I was trying to make, that the selection of prime minister may be by a secret vote after they win, that person say who they want as prime minister. That is that from the party that won. Let them decide who they want as prime minister.
I don't have a problem with how their prime minister gets appointed, being the leader of the party. I hear you about the secret vote, so that can be a check and balance. You might say, well, look, these people won their seats in parliament. They should now determine who is the person who has the control, if you like, or support, I think is the word used, of the majority of members in the House. The truth is, if you had, you may have seen it. there's a suggestion, for instance, from time to time that you hear that let's look at the opposition bench. People could say, look, the opposition bench should get together, 10 or 12 of them, and say, look, write to the president, say, we don't support the leader of the opposition anymore. We would like X to be our leader. And one could get removed. I think Basdeo Pandey was removed on that basis by Rafiq Shah, far back in the 80s somewhere, I suspect.
Yes,
the truth is that if you were in the government, all the members of the House of Representatives could do exactly the same thing. They could say, we no longer support the person appointed as Prime Minister. We now support X. So it's quite possible to achieve that. It's whether people have a backbone to do it.
And I want to say that we don't have the backbone to do it. We have not done that. There are people who in the government, they come in, and before they came into the government, they were people who I thought were people of integrity, were people who were very bright. And then they come into government and you suddenly see them conforming and just going, yes, 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 yes. And then they lose their credibility. You see, and I go back to A.N.R. Robinson, the late A.N.R. Robinson, who was our first politician who became a president. And that to me was a significant transfer point in our country. Because what he did is he simply said, however he got the presidency. He got the presidency and kind of said, he changed his name. I am now to be called A.N.R. Robinson, in the hope, that was my interpretation, was that it was in the hope that we would think he was different. But he was not. He was a
But we go back further than that, Dennise. Dr. Eric Williams, you remember, he introduced that you had to have a undated resignation letter submitted to him.
Yes.
And when you couldn't get through on that because you got some resignations and moving over to the opposition side of things, when he couldn't get that his way there, he sought to introduce and eventually got support by the very Mr. Pandey for the Crossing of the Floor Act.
That is,
so
is
if
that
you're a member of parliament, do you dare, if you go against whoever is the leader of the opposition or the prime minister, I'll throw you out of the parliament in no time. So, why should I say backbone? Understand that is the most undemocratic piece of legislation in my mind. It reinforces, what it does is reinforces Dr. Williams' intent to have a undated letter of resignation. And we now have it in our legislation. So you want to know why people don't have backbone. We actually reinforce that by our legislation.
Tim, could you explain what you mean by that?
Beg your pardon?
We now have that undated letter of resignation as part of our legislation.
Well, it's not there in the legislation. The legislation says, if I throw you out the party, if you cross the party line, if you don't vote as I told you to vote in caucus, I can have you thrown out of parliament. It's happened. It's not just conjecture. It's a reality.
So just now, the person in the maxi asking. So the person in the maxi is asking you. So if I do not agree with the leader of either the leader of the opposition or with the prime minister in terms of how we should vote in parliament, I can be just sent out.
That's correct. Except more than sent out, because you know what happens. What happens really is that your seat becomes vacant and you have a by-election, and the only time that can't happen is in the last year. So from August this year, if you want to put it in today's terms, after August, you can't exercise that right because there's no by-election to come. You put a guy out of parliament, and then you just diminish the numbers that you have.
He can put himself forward as a property.
Of course, he can.
in the by-elections. He can't.
And then that recalls, you could put a crapo in a Balize tie and they're going to vote for him. So whoever,
Tim, what's
yeah,
that? What's that?
recognize that reality. Whoever is the prime minister says, I want X in Y seat. That's who you must vote for.
Yeah. Let
So
me-
we've created a culture that, regardless of whether it's legislation or not, it's
And the
still
culture, the culture is now part of the legislation, so that the power of the leader of the opposition and the power of the prime minister is so tremendous that if someone disagrees with them, they can declare their seat vacant. So the person can't just become an independent, I'm asking. Can the person just become an independent?
Well, all right. So
I believe.
yes, they can. You look back to Mr. Dukaran. You remember he was on the UNC side. He fell out, Mr. Pandey. He moved over and he said, I'm now independent. He did that. Mr. Pandey didn't want, he was in opposition, He didn't want, what you have to do is very smart about it. To look back in the time in Mr. Dukaran, and there were others, I think there were 4 of them, I think, who moved out. And if it was, they waited until the last year to make the move. You follow? Yes, Mr. Pandey could have had them thrown out, but he couldn't get a by-election. So what would happen is his strength was diminished by 4.
Yes.
That last year, you tend to have more if you influence, if you like. But it does mean we downgrade independent thought by the way we've constructed our constitution, or the way that it's unraveled, if you like. I talked about convention. These things perhaps shouldn't happen by convention. And we need to make some radical change. One of them is, I say, have an elected president, have some checks and balances in the system, which will keep whoever is the governing party at least taking a position which is national in scope. So, for instance, you say, well, I want to put up in Port in Tobago, and you put it into your manifesto, and it sounds fancy. I go build a bridge to Tobago, right? But if you had a fiscal council, they would be drawing up for every project like that, where you're spending over X million dollars, you have to have a cost-benefit analysis. So if you could, and cost and benefit is not simply dollars and cents. It's whether it's social benefits that accrue from this decision, this project, is valuable. It's not going to be, paid one time. It's not value that comes in, but at least in the next 10 years, I should have seen the country develop because of the project. And that's what a cost-benefit analysis will do. It won't, all I can say is, I don't think you would make it so that the government are compelled to obey it. But I would think it would look very good if it put forward the project and the fiscal council says, there are no benefits to this. There are only downsides. You are spending money which is not helping develop the country.
Timothy, that is the
that's a check and balance.
You see, that's the problem, because to me, that and the Economic Advisory Board, both of which are excellent checks and balances, are also can be used, one, to delay the work of a government, because everything has you have now a second hurdle, apart from what the ministry and the ministries and the governments, whatever their vision is, they have to get the okay. And then they spend a lot of time, because now you have put it into the legislation, but they don't have to follow it. So you spend a whole year and a half arguing about this.
But you may pay the penalty when you come to the electorate to vote.
Maybe it's again the politician talking. And secondly, I cannot see any minister of finance giving way to any fiscal body or any economic body over, especially what we have now, giving way to them. He didn't do it with the Economic Advisory Board, and it dismantled in less than a year. And I just can't see from a workable point of view, it will be diminishing or reducing the power of the elected members of parliament, cabinet ministers, and making them subject to these councils, which can have the effect of delaying the implementation of projects. That's one of the reasons why they started with state enterprises, because one of the jobs of the whoever was in power was to make sure you never got through with your project. And they had they would have people in the ministries, and it might even be a permanent secretary. I'm sure you've read that, yes, Mr. Minister. When they say, of course, Mr. Minister, and then they take the project and put it in the last
So,
right.
Well, do you see the Toko port? Do you see the Toko port?
No,
No,
but I'm saying
it's
so
It never started. It's about 9 years ago we heard about it.
yeah, it's a lot. But the point I'm making is, all of that goes to leadership. That goes to leadership and equality of leadership. And I'm just saying to you that one of the reasons that that we started having state and too many, you now even gave the prime minister even greater power.
thank you. That is
So I'm
great.
saying a fiscal council doesn't stand by itself. Huh? You have fiscal responsibility legislation. You have targets for inflation, for growth, for poverty, and so on.
So where's the governor of the central bank going to go then?
Wait, just now, Tim and Karen, you're gone somewhere. I don't know where you're gone. Here's something I want us to ask. Here's something. There are comments about this discussion, and someone, I'm going to call the person's name because their name is there. Somebody called Albert Montano has put in this chat saying, the president of Trinidad and Tobago, as it is today, is almost useless because they seem to toe the line of the prime minister's agenda.
Yeah,
And I think
you just went through all of that.
yes, but we need to ensure that people who want to communicate with us, that we recognize them.
Yes, I'm glad.
And I agree with Mr. Montano. It's certainly
You agree with that?
the case. I mean, we have a president, a prime minister who is more powerful than the president of the United States.
He went on to say, I've been watching the politics of Trinidad and Tobago as an 11-year-old boy since 1956 and voted at the age of 21 years in 1966. I voted in every election till I migrated to Canada in 1992. So he was part of creating what it was. And he goes on, why not let the people vote secretly for all parliamentarians if you really want to be democratic?
Like in America. Like, I really think that, I think we need a mixed thing where we have the fixed and a mix where you have the list. But I really think if you really want a democracy, I really now admire the American system. I had to I went and study it. I said, but what is this thing with this, having the executive president and all of this thing? It means that every American who is allowed to vote, who can vote because some cannot vote, but who can vote, feels part of the system. They put in their congressmen, they put in their senators. And when they have the general election, which is fixed every year for the first Tuesday, November, after 4 years, they know, they give that elector they have how many congressmen, depending on how many congressmen you have in your electoral district. That's the number of how many votes he's entitled to take on behalf of those people in his electoral district.
But Karen,
wanted.
Karen,
Democracy.
we have a prime minister who said he has the election date in his back pocket. You want to take that away?
And Mr. Manning did the same thing to her.
He didn't say that. I didn't say Mr. Manning. He said a prime minister who said that.
No, but our current prime minister alluded to that too. And he alluded to that. He may not have used the same words, right? And it's the same thing. And what is wrong with that? That is what I really want with the fiscal council.
What is wrong with what? Karen, what's wrong with what?
No, I think it is wrong. So I'm asking.
I agree with that. That the prime minister
is wrong. So I'm asking him to say to the listeners, what is wrong with being able to do something like that? What if he thinks it is wrong? That
Yeah.
is.
So we should have a fixed date of election.
Yeah, but what is wrong with putting in our constitution, as they have in the United States? They do have it in England. You see how Rishi having his election, election July 4th, and they say you're going to get plenty licks. But I am not a soothsayer. But anyhow, by the way, they don't do that in England. They don't fix a date, and they just did that in France, and you get plenty licks. Right wing, want a set of votes. So what is wrong with giving the president the authority to determine what day, just like Macron did in France?
Here's my opinion on that. My opinion on that is that it should be in the legislation, like every 4 years or every 5 years, a week after the last election, so that there's nobody who can determine when the election will be, because that gives them too much power. So to me, we need, just as how we know when Easter Monday is, we know that our election will be on so and so date.
You know what we know? You know when it's Ash Wednesday.
I didn't use Ash Wednesday.
So you need a election date. I have no doubt about it.
What is the advantage? Or why would you say we should have a fixed date?
Because otherwise, the person who has that right to pull it out of his back pocket can time the election to when he or she considers it most appropriate to win the election. It's just an unfair advantage.
And it's really not in the interest of the people, it's the interest of a party. You interested in power.
I don't think anybody, in the public sphere, I think everybody supports a fixed election date. Everybody supports a maximum of 2 terms for the prime minister. Because we know what happens. I mean, I looked at Tony Blair, my favorite politician, but he ran afoul once he got into that 3rd year. He really thought he alone could do it. And he says it in his book.
He does.
I didn't trust that Gordon Brown will adopt a particular course that he started. Wow. And so I felt I needed to take another 6 months.
Yes.
And then he invaded Iraq.
Timothy, here's a question that I have. You think that only the prime minister should be allowed to serve for 2 terms? So are you saying that other members of parliament should be allowed to serve for more than 2 terms?
Yeah. So I've only restricted it to the prime minister.
I think it's only the prime minister.
There is a question of, Trinidad is a small country, and therefore you have a small pool of people willing to go up for as parliamentary representatives. So in the United States, for instance, whilst you have a fixed election date for the president and for the Congress, nonetheless, you could serve 10 years. You're restricted to 2 terms for the president. And as you see, 2 consecutive terms. We have Mr. Trump again coming back. And the people themselves don't, in the Congress, are not subject to term limits.
And they also are not.
What you do if you take away the term limits is a lot of learning
but
you would have lost. And in a small society, we couldn't afford that.
Here's my rationale for that. I think our biggest problem is that once the political parties change, every policy changes, every project changes. Very few people carry on the projects that have been created between one party and another. So my thing is that is where the real problem is. If we had some kind of rule that insisted that you had to continue with the projects, then I don't want anybody to have more than 2 terms, any of those politicians, because our history has demonstrated that those who have remained as MPs, and they've remained for many, many years, they have become so autocratic and so dictatorial that they will not even accept that, listen, we can do something different. The only way we're going to get new ideas is if we have younger people coming in every 10 years or so. But if you're going
there is value to what you say, But it is one of the reasons why I would like to see an economic development and advisory board. Not the kind that we had where the Prime Minister just put their reports in a rubbish bin. And therefore, to avoid that, what you have to have is
Tim,
you have to have it created by statute, not just created because one man said, let's have a
So
board.
I'm going to say this.
You
I'm going to say
know, you know the Prime Minister put it in a rubbish bin.
no.
Well,
I
I
want
know
to
the
say
people who
this.
collect the rubbish.
I want to say this. You do look at that, and who would have thought? I want to say this. This is where reality. You got to look at reality. Okay, I'll give you three examples. I made a joke about yes, Mr. Minister, which is true. That I knew that you had to get along with your permanent secretary because if you didn't, the permanent secretary could frustrate you, right? And they could tell you, yes, Madam Minister, every time you ask, and they're just doing what they want. So it was important. I give you three examples. The Procurement Act. They passed the Procurement Act. How long ago they passed that Procurement Act? Why didn't they proclaim it, enforce it, implement it? Because the Minister of Finance said he's not a post office box, and it spent about 3 years or 4 years before and even only partially implementing it. He has not implemented what is going on right now with the sale of the refinery. I spoke to Mr. Alchan, who was the former regulator, so I want to make sure that I had it right. Of 5 of 2016 for disposal of state lands, it says that that part does not come into effect unless the regulations are passed. That's 2016. 8 years later, we don't even have a central tenants board to look at it. So who is looking at it? The Prime Minister and his cabinet making a decision. And I'm pretty confident if that sale of that refinery went to the procurement regulator under the powers and the guidelines that are used, that the gentleman, based on what has been reported, would not qualify. So you could sit down there and talk about Economic Advisory Board, and the Gambling Commission. How long they telling us about the Gambling Commission? Why is it not, they passed it? Have they proclaimed it? Not at all. 5, 6 years ago. What have they done? IMF has begged them to bring into force the Nunez Institute of Statistical Thing. How long? Nothing. Don't you understand? They will tell you yes, and nothing will happen. So you are fooling. That is why they started, I know, with the state companies, because that was the job of the opposition, to make sure that whoever was inside of the various ministries, who were then PSs or who were senior people there, or maybe not senior people there, frustrated these projects. So if you don't understand that passing these things as good as the answer, then I am just saying the wake-up call is they will do that, and the IMF and everybody will praise them. The reality is they will frustrate the living daylights out of them.
Karen, you said you were going to give 3 examples. You gave the procurement legislation, you gave the gambling commission. What is the third example?
I gave 3 of them. Gambling. Well, the TTRA is, I didn't give that example, but that is also hanging around. And the property tax is another one that's hanging around, whether you like it or not. And all of them, every single one of them, when they came into office in 2015, your minister, go back to speeches, yes, you must go and look at the budgets and read. People must read the budgets. You read the budgets, and every year he'd say, and next year we get in the Toko Port, and next year we get in the hills, and next year the Gambling Commission will be in place, and next year we will have property tax, and next year. But what they do is it's switch and bait. They tell you what you want to hear, assent to the legislation, but do not proclaim it. To proclaim it, you have to put in the institutions and the regulations, and that they do not do.
Okay, so Tim, what is going through your mind right now?
Well, when Karen said that, all of it is correct. I just said, well, what do we do about it? I like to think that I'm solutions oriented.
Right.
Yes, we have a lot of complaints. And I still think that the Fiscal Council, Fiscal Responsibility Legislation, and independently run Economic Development Board, which was created by statute would act as a check and balance. There's no perfect. If somebody in any system in the world is intent upon having their own way, they're going to achieve that objective. I would think, and Karen was making the point that the civil servants might say, yes, sir, 3 bags full, and not take you on, not really do anything. So that is something, as Dr. Farrell had talked about, the civil service. We have borrowed systems from elsewhere that don't work, have never worked in Trinidad and Tobago. And what we really need to do, and I pointed out to the Constitutional Commission, and I got the feeling that Dr. Farrell supported me, that you can make this amendment with a simple majority. So I'm not talking, grandiose things that can never happen because we need a 3/4 majority. Simple majority. The main parliament, the parliament as constituted right now, could in fact introduce legislation that would ensure that when we create an act like this, we need to look at the civil service and see how they acted. So under the Constitution, all the powers were given to the commissions. So really, the president was allowed to appoint the chairman of the commission. And it starts with the commissions. They have a place. But what the Constitution right now today says, that the commission shall be entitled to pass over to the permanent secretaries in our case and delegate to them some of the powers held by the commission. And if you look at any modern management system, if you ask me as a manager, I'm the permanent secretary, and you say, I want you to achieve this, that, and elsewhere. And yet I don't have a power to hire these people, to transfer these people, to discipline these people. None of these things are within, and it's all the commission have to do it. And so they have a big backlog and nothing happens. We've created, a system of having layers of this where it's bureaucratic, red tape, and geared towards zero output. So we can right now say to the that they will delegate powers to the permanent secretary, who will have that power. And then what you tell the permanent secretaries, well, I'm going to pay you on performance. Yes, you get your basic salary. I'm willing to give them the 16% they wanted if they reach the targets that I want them to achieve that have been set. So it's pay for performance. And if you achieve that, then a permanent secretary, seeing that this is before him, I don't care what they see. Money talks and the other thing walks. I'm not wanting to use unparliamentary language.
I'm just trying to figure out what the word is myself.
But
I have such a pure mind. I can't think what the word is.
it's something that you've just said. You've said that 16% really should have been a pay for performance, and it should have been to maybe the public servants, the permanent secretaries. But the 16% was given to the members of parliament. And I am trying to figure out what is the pay for performance that allowed them to get that 16%. How could you?
So it's exactly that. You set targets. So you could have macro targets and you could have micro targets. So I want to get this project done. I want it in 6 months, these sort of things. And you have to work it out with your permanent secretary, what is reasonable. And in fact, I'm a big believer in having milestones towards the target. So if the target is 6 months now, I'm not waiting till 6 months to say, we're editing. I want to know month 1, have you achieved this point? And that's how the Atlantic LNG plants were built, by the way. If you remember, we had a rumble with the staff on the question of pay. They introduced pay for performance, but you got it by milestones.
Another private company. Yeah?
but you can do it in the civil service. You could,
Yeah,
there
what
are.
I will say is
It's
this.
done in Canada. It's done in the UK. It's done in Singapore. You can have pay for performance. We have this idea, no, that can't work in the civil service.
No,
You
I don't.
could
I'm
make
not
it
saying
work.
that. I'm
And
not saying that. I'm not saying
Karen,
that.
what do you say
permanent
about the civil
secretary.
service?
I'm
I mean,
not saying that.
I'm curious about Karen's view of
No.
whether this can work in the
No,
public
no,
service.
I'm not saying that at all. What I will say is this: I think that if we implemented a truly independent president, we still have the same president, prime minister, but a truly independent president, not one elected by not this electoral college thing, and someone who had all the qualifications. That would put a lot of trust, because I think a lot of what we have missing in Trinidad is there's a lack of trust and confidence in what the government says to you. But if we can implement that, I think that will go a long way to give people confidence in the Economic Advisory Board, give them confidence in the Fiscal Council Board, because in America they have that. All governments operate with these specialists that advise them. And I think also too, doing that, the only problem you will have is two problems I could see. Again, it comes from experience. Two problems I could see coming out of that is that the cabinet is not united. I don't know about. I can't speak for them now, although I could kind of guess, but they're not that so united. And there's a lot of competition, and so if it's saying paper for performance, sometimes that in itself will have your own cabinet colleague undermining you.
And so you must have pay for performance for your cabinet ministers too. Imagine
that's where the bacchanal will start, because what they will do,
GDP is, nobody, we're treating them as a unit. If you don't reach X GDP, if the debt to GDP ratio is not within
that's only the
certain
Minister of Finance.
packages, if poverty has not been reduced, if housing hasn't increased, can you imagine what a wonderful country we would have? You target all the things that the people want.
No, what I can imagine? A lot of fighting going on in that cabinet and a lot of undermine. I'm sorry.
Why would they fight?
Why would they undermine? Because
they would defeat their own. They would defeat themselves.
You got
Karen, you are speaking based,
and I got nothing.
Karen, you are speaking based on your experience, and I think that the experience of a lot of fighting among the members of parliament and among the cabinet, I think that is absolutely valid. But you see, whenever a party is elected, the first thing they do is try to come up with, okay, what is the goal that we have? What is it that we want to achieve by whatever? And if you begin by developing a team that goes beyond, I want to comb my hair different every week. I want to wear a fancy dress every week. I want to get a car. I want to get police to. If you go beyond that and you go beyond, what are the underlying issues? What are the things that we want 5 years after we've left office? What do we want this society to see? If you have consistency with that as a team, then that will just go down. You will be able to put that down. That is how successful companies work. They come up with what is the thing we're going to do. And after they agree on their vision, they then come up with what is the strategy. And after you come up with the strategy, then you come up with what is the action or the tactics that we are going to implement. So you need to have a vision, a strategy, and tactics.
You should have it before the election.
But they have all of those things. What you do need, like in any organization that is successful, is the leadership, the quality of the leadership. If you have the right leadership and setting the right tone and expectations, then you are going to get all the things that you are.
And Karen, I totally agree with you that leadership is what matters, and we need to ensure that our leaders are honest, they're transparent, they have integrity, and they have an objective that we all understand. I mean, I say all the time, under Patrick Manning, I understood Vision 2020. Since then, I have not had anything that makes me feel as if this is where Trinidad wants to go. I've not seen it in the various industries. I've certainly not seen it in tourism, which could be our diversification point. I've not seen it in that. As a matter of fact, in the new tourism company, just the fourth CEO just recently resigned. If you have 4 CEOs resigning in a short time, nothing will happen in the organization.
What about with WASA? They have a lot of turnover too.
They have turnover. They have a lot of
Like
turnover.
a Ferris wheel.
Again and again, Karen.
Huh?
WASA has had strategic plans for many, many, many times. Again, comments that I've made about what happens when you have the change in the government. What happens is they throw away whatever the person was doing before, whatever the party was doing before, whoever, and they start new again. And that is where a lot of our money just disappears. And that is where people see nothing that they can say, well, all right, I can follow this. Instead, what people are looking for is confrontation. So back to the discussion on the Constitution.
All is constitutional, you know what I mean?
It's all, but Tim, here's something.
Well, that's what you have to say, Tim. What point?
Yeah, you know, I think Karen made a good point about cabinet. And I wonder if the reason why all this tugging and pulling, shall we say, happens in the cabinet is because there are too many notes that go to cabinet. The United Kingdom don't have that many notes going to the cabinet, because what happens, and I remember speaking to a minister who was in the Pandey government. He said he was allotted a certain exercise. He was told to come back and report in 3 months. What was the position? And that's what, and he was made to account for that. Where am I? If it didn't happen, why didn't happen? But when we have this mountain of papers, and I don't know where that started, but really that's not a constitutional issue. That's just a day-to-day managerial question. And you should limit. I'll give you one example. So we have the CDA. You appoint the CDA, you should have there set out what is the guidelines for leases, right? And what procurement you should abide by.
Procurement legislation.
You should have what you know what happens in Trinidad. Every single lease comes back to the cabinet to get approved. That's nonsense.
Because the procurement legislation
integrated nonsense. Because I get a say to say no, so and so, so and so.
But so then you gave me the answer. You gave me the answer why the 5 of 2016, which deals with the disposal of state lands, to up to now they have not passed the regulations, and because they haven't, I mean, I spoke to Mr. Munilal Lalchad on it. Because of that, it's in the hands of the cabinet, because they
so jump high or jump low.
Just so they wanted just so.
And I wanted
Dr. Rowley.
He
absented himself in the Joint Select Committee. Doesn't that tell you he saw it as, he sees procurement as a stumbling block? He sees checks and balances as some stumbling block.
And it is, and none of us have said so far. And none of us have said so far.
I'm not sure UNC want procurement either, you know, but that's a different story.
I will not say why. I have done a show on it actually, and Mr. Lalchad was the guest on the show. So we did speak about the procurement legislation, and he didn't say it, I'm not quoting him on that, but you may not be wrong at all. Neither side wants it. Okay.
And the reason, Karen, the reason neither side want it is they all have the projects that their contact people need to get the contract.
Right.
That is the reason.
So you could get the finance for the election.
There we go.
Yeah. And that is why you talk about a number of things that go to cabinet, all the bits of paper. They all go to bits of paper because each of those ministers, each one has an interest in something. So the
this is true. And it's not only that, it's the legislation. I just gave you the example. Why is cabinet considering the sale of the refinery? That should be the procurement regulator should be doing that. And based on what is said about Mr. Jindal, he shouldn't even be considered. That is why they were not passed. Say 8 years later and none. The Gambling Commission, they still have the private members club, right? They still have that. Why? Because they have not passed the regulations.
Okay.
So it means, and they do that. What I'm trying to say, I guess this is what I'm trying to say. What you need is a good leader. That is the beginning and end of the story. You get a good leader, just like in all the countries that have excelled. You cannot tell me a country that has excelled. In Germany, Merkel was held up in the highest esteem. And
can you give us your definition of a good leader, Karen?
A good leader is one, but I am not even dealing with, well, the integrity, obviously. People are going to say that the integrity, honesty, and so on. That's a given, right? That is a given. But everybody says it, and it will be the truth. You need someone who has a vision. When I remember CL Financial with Mr. Dupree and the Chinese, when I was doing my MBA, and they were telling us, why it is that these countries were doing so well. Because what they did is they didn't plan for today, they planned for 10 years ahead and work backwards. But the problem was there are interests in the country who want you to continue renting from them. So they want to tell you that you're building too much big buildings, but the real reason is they getting rental money and you taking away their rental money. So what I'm trying to say is a good leader is one who has the vision, a sense of mission, has respect of people, has a proven track record in whatever at a national level, has worked at a national level, has the confidence of the people and believe that the person has no hidden agenda and has the strength and the fortitude to make the decisions in the interest of the country. And
how do we achieve that?
Well,
we need party financing.
Tim, if I say you are the person, then they will say I brought you on for that.
Well,
so
I am just saying party financing. That doesn't translate into any person. I'm saying as a prerequisite to reach where you want to reach, we need party financing, because the truth is we have people who invest in whoever party they think will form the government, and they're looking for a return on their investment.
Yeah,
so hence the reason why you're seeing pulling and tugging and swaying. We need party financing as a prerequisite to finding a good leader.
You yourself,
please explain.
What's his name? Michael Abdullah, because he forgot that he was on my show once, and you wouldn't know it was about party finance because it's not headed that way. And he thought he didn't know I said, excuse me, Michael, I'm David. You were on my show and we talked about party financing, and you told me that we use the Jamaican model, and you more or less said it was a good one. And I am sure with the right leader, the first thing they will do that will give people confidence in that leader passing that legislation. If any leader pass that legislation, you will know that leader is not making joke. And if we make sure the procurement regulation, what is scheduled medical services excluded from the office of the regulator? What is that? What is that about?
So
and then put it into place.
So let's go back to party financing. What do you mean by the person in Maxi want to know, what do you mean by party financing?
What it requires is regulations about how much any individual can contribute to a political party. And if it is above a certain amount, this is how it's in the bill that is before the Joint Select Committee. If it's above a certain amount, then your name has to go to the EBC. And therefore, you have to be known as a person who is a supporter of X party, which means that when the procurement comes around, it's not that that person cannot be an entry, but you would have noted on the file that he contributed X dollars. And therefore, you're going to want to make sure that there's, this is a level playing field you've created, and you're choosing best value for money. That's a job. That's I mean, in a core, procurement is about best value for money.
With the
That's
campaign
what we want to achieve,
financing,
not
what
best value for whoever happens to be the minister or whatever.
right, with the campaign financing, they are setting up a separate regulator. It's not this registrar. There's a registrar for campaign financing. I can't remember but it's a registrar. So you register with them. And then, for example, if you do an advertisement on television, you have to put the name sponsored by. If they put an advertisement in the newspaper, sponsored by, right? Also, another rule they have is that equal time on television, and also not only equal time, but at the also in terms of the high when people are watching television the most during that period, it is also has to be split among the parties. So in other words, the campaign financing is an effort to take you from behind the thing of protection. And now we understand why you get that big contract. And if you want it, let us put your name on the advertisement. And government, TTT, all the television, TTT, and all the government agencies have to give equal time to all the parties. That is what it says. That's some of what it says. And it's just a special registrar for that.
Okay, so
will we get it?
For that, anyhow.
Here's my question. If this was a perfect world and we could come up with 3 things we'd like to see happen before the next general elections, what are those 3 changes you would like to see?
After,
I would like to see.
I want to just one thing. Once he answers you, I want to talk about the savings provisions after, because that's important.
So I would like to see a substantive president. I would like to see the electoral system change. And I would like to see a fiscal council created, supported by fiscal responsibility legislation.
And the middle one, could you see explain what you mean by the second one? The electoral process change.
Well, so I prefer to see that we have a mixed form. So we continue to have a representative for every constituency, right. But then the popular vote determines how many numbers of candidates on a list that gets appointed into parliament. It is what was recommended by the Wooden Constitution. It was what was recommended by Hayat Ali. Amazingly, I swear that when the commission in about 1991 was sitting in New Zealand, because that's what they have, they recommended a mixed form. They recommended a single house. Stop duplicating your resources.
Has one house, National Assembly.
And it's made up of constituency representatives and persons drawn from a list who then form the parliament. And I would like to see independent senators continued, appointed by the independent president. Okay. And the fiscal council appointed. I want to see the president serve as the chair of the fiscal council.
Now, I am going to ask.
That's my wish list. If I restrict it to
Mr. Hammersmith, I am going to ask you to explain, because in the Hayat Ali, I think, committee, they did a good job of trying to show the difference between past the post and proportional representation, how the results would be different when you use both. So if you can explain, since you are agreeing that we'll still use the past the post for 41 thing, and then another 41, because they said to double it. So you'll have 41 that will be in the list. So explain how that will operate to the advantage of the parties that did not win a seat but had a large number of voters, and therefore can have their voices heard in the parliament and have a truly democratic representative government. Explain the listing for people to see. Let me see if you're a good teacher, because I had enough trouble understanding it.
So I want to see to the advantage of the people, not the party. Let's start
Right.
there. And therefore, if you're going to talk in those terms, let's see what the ballot paper looks like. Because it's a single ballot paper. You're going to see it just like it is now with your constituency representative when you go to vote. It
And
has
the
the
party.
parties. It has the party's name and the party's logo.
Mm-hmm.
And you put your X
Mm-hmm.
against the representative that you consider the best representative aligned with a particular party or an independent, if that was your choice.
Right.
You would have another, on that same form, you will have the political parties' names. And you will put your X against the political party. And by doing that, what you're saying is, I support the choice to be taken from the list. And the political parties then, and it's why I call it proportional representation, if I win 40% of the votes, I will end up with 40% of the parliamentary representatives in parliament. If I want 60% of the vote, ultimately the combination of my constituency representative and the person chosen from the list, and that list has to be presented to the EBC before the election. And you could decide whether that list should be made known to the public or not. Those are choices you can make. But the party would win, and you would then have a approach whereby you have to, because what you don't want is to have a multiplicity of parties who want, 2 votes or whatever.
Right,
So
right.
there's a minimum threshold you have to attain, and you can fix it where you want. 5% is a good threshold.
5% is what I've seen, yeah.
And therefore, if I won 15% of the vote, that's a popular vote, I would get 15% of seats. What we have right now, I think, is in many ways undemocratic. What you've really done is disenfranchise a large sector of our people, which is possibly why you see such a large number of persons not going to vote. And we introduced this system. It's not unknown to Trinidad. We have it in a local election.
Right, local government.
We have that combination of representative and popular vote to decide how many councillors you have in each council.
And the objective would be then?
But ultimately, what it would mean is, and if you go back at the past elections, 1981, 1991, 2007, you will see 23% of the population having no seat in parliament. And that's tantamount, to saying, well, there should be no taxation without representation. How can you exclude 23% of the people from being represented? In New Zealand, when 12%, they reached that 12% mark, that a party didn't win seats, yet had 12%, they said, this is undemocratic. And this is the government said it, yeah? And they set up a commission. The commission represented very much aligned with what Woodin had done back in 75, 76. So it's amazing that he had done that, and they followed that, which adopted something of the German system and is now seen in more democracies around the world have proportional representation of some form.
Because remember with
as opposed to first past the post.
When Trump won against Hillary Clinton, she got 7 million more votes. She got 7 million more votes than he got. And yet, because of their system, he became president. So, and even in Trinidad, there have been instances where a party A wins the most of the constituencies because of the first past the post, but because of the number of persons who would have gone out to vote in certain constituencies, although they didn't win, at the end of it, you will have a higher number of persons from the opposition, whoever the opposition is, having a higher number. So more people voted for the party that is in the opposition than the party that formed the government. So this is a way of kind of trying to create some sort of equity in the system.
And every vote counts,
Yes, every
as
vote
opposed to
counts.
being thrown away. So
I have
What did you want to see?
No, I have a comment that somebody has put in here that the citizens must be allowed to choose all the members of parliament. Why can't you trust us as citizens? And that's a serious point that he's making. And I think the
I'm
person
not
is
sure
saying
if I quite understand it though. Could
is
you?
the senators, that the person is actually saying that every member of parliament should be elected.
Oh, I
As
see. No,
opposed
no
to-
Like,
Senate.
like an
And
ambassador.
that's what we've said, huh? I've said no Senate, but I do think there is value in having the independent senators appointed.
No. But he's saying that whoever, whether the lower house or the upper house, it's like in America with the congressmen and senators.
Yeah, but I'm recommending a single house, remember?
Okay,
So
right.
it
But
doesn't
I'm
matter to
saying,
me.
but let me just make the point. With the Congress, it's 4 years they get. With the senators, they get 6 years. So at no time will there be a thing. In other words, and it's 4 years. Every 4 years, you have an election. So at some point in time, the congressmen or the senators from the other party, from the other election, will still be in the House, but they would have been elected in their electoral district. And so whoever is, and when you go to choose the president, it is based on how many, not the Senate, how many congressmen your party has in your electoral district. That's the number of electoral votes that will be allotted to you. And it is really, to me, the right thing, because this country is too corrupt. I have no confidence in anybody to do the right thing. And to be honest, there is too much, it's gone too deep. The envelope system has gone too deep. It's entrenched in this country. So we have to think out the box and do what is best to save our country.
But I think this person's point of all of the members of parliament being there because they are elected, I think that's a very good point. Because once you have to rely on an appointment, then it is okay what you're giving me for the appointment. It is not on the basis of, and even our independent senators, some of them I think are on the basis of their competence, but I'm not very confident
that they are independent. I can tell you some of them are not independent. I
If
know
I could go back
some of them are not.
to say, I was talking about the elected president first, huh? So
Yes.
it's not the prime minister's president.
Yes.
It's the elected president.
But we went further than you.
Appointing these people.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you didn't want independent senators, fine.
What
What
do
I
they
would
do?
tell
What do
you.
they do? What do they do? What did he say?
All right, so if I can address that.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, the former president
Yeah,
of the Senate.
if
but
I
what
can
do they
address
do?
it, what they do. Every time Trinidad and Tobago has been at a crunch point, we look to the independent senators to save us. That's a reality. The people look to they may not be getting it, eh? I'm saying
no, give an example, because you're talking to the man in the street. Give me an example.
Saying the man in the street, the woman in the street,
yes,
the man and woman in the maxi taxi are saying,
everybody, right.
Look, when a crunch comes, I look into the independent senators to save us.
How? Give me an example.
Well, I can't point to a particular piece of legislation, but there are a number of occasions when legislation was put before the Senate, is passed in the House, and is put before the Senate.
That is true.
And you will see the headlines coming out. People say and screaming, I hope the independent senators save us from whatever danger they perceive that this, and that's happened several times. Several times.
I'm glad you have confidence in them, but I'm very sorry. 16 of them are from the government, and so they're going to the government.
Yes, Karen, but I'm talking about an independent president elected by the people.
Right, that's the
senators, not.
I agree with
not
that.
the prime minister appointing the senators.
100%.
Because what we
with that one.
we've transitioned to is a situation in which the prime minister has so much power
That
that
is
he
why
can do, anything, and we have allowed that to happen. And as a result of that, we've had prime ministers who are just disrespectful of our citizens. And that is absolutely unfortunate. Here's something I want to ask: Can not can? There's a comment that Tobago wants its own commissioner of police. Is that possible? Constitutionally, is that permissible?
You could do
Well,
anything.
no, not right now. No, it's not possible. But I could understand what they want is a resident head. He doesn't have to be the commissioner of police, but he could be the co-commissioner of police. I mean, you need one, unless you want two police. If you had two police forces and that was acceptable, fine. But I think we're a small country. If you keep subdividing these things, it's going to become too costly. But I do feel that Tobago deserves autonomy, and with autonomy comes they must have a resident head of the police service in Tobago, because somebody has to give directions. Now, that person must work in tandem with the commissioner of police, or else we're not going to get the thing right. I suspect, I don't know. I don't know what percentage of the policemen in Tobago actually come from Trinidad, or if they're all Tobagonians. I don't know the answer to that. But those are issues you need to look at. But a small country, I think that it's fearful that you just have too many positions that are not unified.
And the thing about it is,
police force.
And the thing that strengthens your point, although I don't know, everything have pros and cons. That's the truth. The thing that strengthens that point you're making is because when they made the amendment to the Constitution, I think in 2006, and your current prime minister nearly had a heart attack. He was aware at the time when it was made, but you go back to the Hansard and you'll see it. I've spoken about it already. The point that was made was that the Police Service Commission, they would be responsible for the transfer, discipline, etc., for the Commissioner of Police and Deputy. Anybody under the rank of Deputy or Commissioner of Police, they are subject to the Commissioner of Police. He has the power to discipline, transfer, etc. Of course, you have a right of appeal to the appeal board. So the problem may be that you can't have two commissioners of police. You can't have two commissioners of police. Maybe you could have a deputy commissioner of police, but you can't have two people being
I agree with responsibility for Tobago. But I do think the same management system that really what you're looking at, they took away from the commission the right to appoint below certain levels to appoint, discipline, promote,
transfer,
and that's what we need in the public service. And as I say, I'm willing to enhance the targets being achieved, to enhance the and I think that I'm not just saying that, carelessly. I do believe that pay for performance, because I've worked in particular institutions, particular organizations, I have seen it work. I have seen where the actual employees came to like the idea. We used to post on a board how you were doing every month. You could see this trajectory going up. And the numbers of people that went out there to look at the board when this was posted was amazing, because they bought in to the organization, and they therefore had the performance of the organization. And you have to get it right. I mean, pay for performance is not a simple introduction. For instance, profit is not the only issue. The organization I talk about, our profit, all our goods were exported. The price of it was determined internationally, not by us. But what productivity we created, what safety we created, what methodologies were safety what methodologies we kept. We had control over that.
Mm-hmm.
And in that organization, we moved, I think it was in 1991, from 25 lost time injuries per million man hours, which is
Mm-hmm.
a certain characteristic you look at.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought it down in 5 years to zero.
Oh my gosh.
Zero lost time injuries. And
Oh
I
my
do
gosh.
believe that all of this, in
I'm
conjunction,
impressed.
work together to get performance, productivity, better salaries, and safety for the staff, because it's generally fairly unsafe conditions you're talking about. It's not
Right.
just you're going to work further
Right.
or something in an office.
That's kind of unsafe, can be unsafe too. Yeah, but I wanted before we finish, I told Tim that I wanted to raise the savings clause because I think it's a very important part of the Constitution, and that has had played a great part with the death penalty cases as well as the Bail Act, and it can play a part for any act that was passed prior to independence, because in the Independence Constitution and in the Republican Constitution or Republic Constitution, effectively it says that any, Section 4 and 5 talk about your inalienable rights, your right to freedom of expression, freedom, those rights, almost you almost can't violate those rights, those human rights that we have. And that's why in some legislations you need a 3/5 or 3/4 majority, because some of the provisions have that effect. And in any case, with when we became independent, we kept this savings clause and we reenacted it more or less the same way in the Republican Constitution. And effectively, what it says is that any law any law that existed prior to independence and prior to obviously republic, going back prior to independence, even though it violates sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution, which are your human rights, that thing, even though is valid and is good law. And what that has caused was the death penalty, because we have the Summary Offences Act. And under that Summary Offences Act, it says it was abolished a long time ago in England. But remember, we inherited it because we had not abolished it. They abolished it, but they had not abolished it at the time that when we became an independent country. And what it says is the penalty for murder shall be death. And there are a whole range of cases, which I will not go into, that at the end of the day, because we have kept the Privy Council as our final court of peace, so this also deals with the Privy Council, not only on constitutional matters, but it is the Constitution, because it's how to interpret that savings provision. And the Privy Council, because they are very anti-death penalty, they have interpreted that Section 6 to mean it's mandatory. There's no discretion on the part of a judge to give anything less than death as the penalty for murder, not manslaughter or anything else, but for murder. You have no discretion. So they say it's a fixed penalty clause. And that, why I'm raising it now, is because countries like Guyana, Barbados, and because those are the two that stand out in particular. Belize had that savings clause, but we had it for 5 years. They had a time limit. They said after 5 years, it's gone. But when Guyana made the CCJ their final court of appeal, and Barbados made the CCJ their final court of appeal, that same savings clause was being considered. And to determine that, the Privy Council says that it is not a modifying, you cannot modify it. It says what it says, and the only thing you can give is not a limit up to, it is a maximum, it is not a maximum penalty, it is a mandatory penalty. Well, the CCJ heard it, and I just want to quote something from one of the cases to show you the difference between how the CCJ handles cases that come from our countries. And this is a very recent case, a few years ago. coming out of the Caribbean Court of Justice by Sir Dennis Byron. He was the president of the court at the time. And I'm just taking the part that I think is important for people to hear why, how strongly the Caribbean Court of Justice felt, because they did not follow England. They said it is not a mandatory, it is a maximum, and you can give a life sentence. It does not have to be death. It can go up to death, but you also have this discretion of going for the life sentence. And all the persons who were at that time in England, eventually, the bottom line is that is the law still in England. So when it came to the CCJ, and this case came from Barbados, this is what Sir Dennis Byron said. This is just one. The general savings clause is an unacceptable diminution of the freedom of newly independent peoples who fought for their freedom with unalienable faith in fundamental. My handwriting is so bad. In fundamental human rights. The idea that even where a provision is inconsistent with a fundamental right or fundamental act is prevented from declaring the truth of that inconsistency just because the law was formed part of our inherited laws from a colonial regime must be condemned. So you understand how the CCJ thinks on a serious thing like the death penalty, and they did the same thing with the Bail Act. When the Bail Act...
Karen, what is the question you want to ask him?
No, so what? No, you don't have to understand. This is a discussion. I am saying to him...
But 5 minutes. You need to hear what you want from Tim.
Dennise, I think I told you I'm not an interviewer. I think I've said that already.
We have 5 more minutes.
So I just want to make the point, and I discussed it with Tim, that I think an important change in the Constitution has to be that savings clause, because from what I read out there, it is clear that we cannot continue to have the United Kingdom making the laws for a country that's not only independent, but as a republic. And that is the point that I told him, that I wanted to raise the savings clause with him, and what were his views on it.
So if I may say, I think some work has to be done before you can abandon the savings clause, because it's not only relating to murder, it's not only relating to criminal acts. There may be legislation we inherited that we want to keep. So somebody has to do the work to see what legislation falls within that. Ensure either we have our own legislation or we just delete the rest of it. So that's important. But really the crux of the matter, I think, relates to the difference between the Caribbean Court of Justice and the Privy Council from a constitutional point of view. Mm-hmm. I have no problems with it. What I promote is that the Caribbean Court of Justice ought to be appointed as the originating court for all constitutional matters. So once you began a constitutional matter, you bring it directly. You don't go to the Magistrates Court and then the High Court and the Court of Appeal. Right. You go straight to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and you will retain a right to go to the Privy Council. And I say review that for 5 years. At least then the people will decide, hey, why are we wasting our time going to the Privy Council? The Caribbean Court of Justice is just as good, if not better. All right. Or they may say the reverse. Hey, we need the Privy Council because the Caribbean Court of Justice, they're too soft on our politicians. I don't know what the people will say, but it is a good job. You have 5 years to test them, to put one against the other and say, then go to the people. Then you can have a citizens' assembly, discuss it, bring in opinion people, because you don't just want politicians driving the issue and go to a referendum.
With a lower threshold. You mentioned that.
Yeah, so maybe 60% might be ideal. Certainly you don't want to put an absurdly higher threshold, because we've seen it hasn't worked in certain countries. You want something achievable, but you do want a majority of your people saying, this is a vision we want to follow, which is our problem in Trinidad and Tobago. We're so divided by politics, by ethnicity, by class, that what happens is it's so difficult, therefore, to follow a common vision.
Yeah.
We need to introduce things which allow us to have a common vision for Trinidad and Tobago.
And Tim, as we come to an end, what is your parting word for us?
Well, I would say what I would like to see, you only allowed me 3 choices for the Constitution, but you see, the Constitution can be transformative. And I want to see, in addition, and I think I mentioned this before, in addition to having rights and freedoms, we must know what duties and responsibilities are expected of a citizen. And this was a point that Dr. Farrell was making. We need that, and we need to take it into the schools. We need to use drama, poetry, music, art, and ingrain that. That must become embodied in us as what we stand for, what Trinidad, what value system do we in Trinidad. What is a Trini? How will you recognize a Trini? What value? And until we do that, you're not going to get that sense of unity that we need to follow a common vision.
Thank you very much. And David, I think, is there anything you wish to pop in on as we bring the show to an end, David?
No, I'm in agreement with all that has been said. And I appreciate Mr. Timothy's modus operandi. I would like to see somebody take it up with him and form a team so that we can achieve such directions.
Thank you very much as we bring our Monday Hard Talk to an end. Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you. All the best.
Yes, we good having you on.
And you notice this is the calm after the storm that is behind me, right?
They say God is a Trini.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you, Mr. Hamblesmith.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here anytime.
Great session. Great session.
Bye.
And bye. That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk right here at Power 102 Digital, hosted by Karen Nunez Tesheira and Dennise Demming, with our special guest, Mr. Timothy Hamblesmith. Karen and they will be back next Monday for another edition of Hard Talk.